Hello everyone, welcome to my channel Code Possibility. Today in this video we will see how to use Marshmallow to validate the HTTP Request JSON body. Marshmallow is a serialization and deserialization library. It can be used to convert objects to and from Python data types. In the context of RESTful API development, Marshmallow can be used to modularize the HTTP request body parsing and validations. However, the concepts explained in this video is applicable for any use case where serialization and deserialization is required. We will start with the basic Flask app. Here, I have already defined a simple Flask application. You can see the requirements.txt file where I have included the dependencies, which is Flask and Marshmallow, which is a library we are going to use. And Flask-Marshmallow is a wrapper for Marshmallow for Flask. We need to install these dependencies. Here app.py contains a simple route defined with name /hello. We will test this by running the server. Python app.py. I will use curl command to test the API. Curl http://localhost 5000/hello. You can see the hello world printed successfully. Now we will start adding the Marshmallow capabilities into our application. To start using Marshmallow, we need to first import the Marshmallow class from the Flask Marshmallow wrapper. From Flask Marshmallow, import Marshmallow. And then we have to initialize a variable, say MA, and create an object of Marshmallow and pass the app variable for that. With this, we have established connection between the Flask and Marshmallow. Now we will delete this hello root and start adding our own root. I am going to add a root named project, which is going to accept methods get and post. Define project. As we are going to accept both get and post, we need to validate the method before we process it. If request.method equal to post. For this demonstration purpose, I'm not going to use the get method. I'm going to just use the post method. We have defined the route for our demonstration purpose. Now we'll start defining the schema. Say I'm going to define a new schema named add project request schema, where we are going to use that as a processing the input for adding a new project. Class add project request schema, which is going to inherit from schema, which has to be imported from Marshmallow. Once we have imported the schema, and we'll start defining it. I'm going to start with a simple variable, say the name of the project, and define it as a string field. This much is a default behavior. I also need to import these fields. I will start the server again. Here I have defined the name as a string field. This much is sufficient for a default behavior. Now, as we are going to use this schema for validation as well, we need to start implementing or incorporating our validation rules in this schema. First, I will make this name as a required field, which means like when an API is being called, this field has to be sent in the input. Else Marshmallow will be throwing error, validation error. Say I will make this as a required field. I'm going to set required equal to true. we'll start testing with this. To test it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new file, request body.json, and I'm going to open it here. I'm going to define the JSON name is test project name. I'm going to invoke the API, passing this request body to the post API. The curl command for that is curl request the post, and data I'm going to use the request dash body.json. Header I'm going to pass this as content type application/json, and I'm going to mention the URL. I'm going to hit this request. I'm going to import how to import the request. The server has been restarted. Since I haven't responded any return function, this is the error which has been thrown. Now I'm going to add the validation logic to validate the request body. Add project request schema dot validate and request.json. I'm going to pass the received JSON to validate the input. This validate function will return errors if there are any errors. I have to check if there are any errors and then return the errors with the HTTP code as 422, which is unprocessable entity. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the same response which I have received. Return request.json. We will now test this API. Now you can see I have received the response which I have passed. The difference is the input has been validated and then it has been responded back to the client. We can also define a dictionary to load the request JSON. Project request dictionary is add project schema dot load request.json. Here the load method, what it does is it validates the schema and then loads it into a dictionary. Here the validate without doing any deserialization, it's just going to validate the schema. The load will do both. Here I have done it again just for the sake of this demonstration, but based on your need, you can either use validate or just load. And I'm going to respond this dictionary here. I'm going to test it. So I have received the passed response. For testing whether this required field has been validated or not, what we will do, we'll just remove this and pass it. You can see the Marshmallow has validated the request schema and responded with an error saying that the field name with message missing data for the required field, as we have marked it as the required. I will undo these changes. Now we have seen how to mark a field to be required. The next type of validation which we can implement for the string is the length validation. Say we want to validate the length of the name field, which should be between length 3 and 255. Then we can define it as validate is equal to validate. Actually, again, we have to import this from the Marshmallow. Validate dot length, which is with minimum of length 3 to maximum of length 255. We'll save this changes and we will test it with the passing the response body. Say I pass a name of string of length just 2 letters. Marshmallow has thrown an error saying that length must be between 3 and 255. I will undo these changes. As you can see, this is how we need to validate the length. The next type of validation is one-off validation. This can be used when there is an enum kind of input attribute where string can take values within a predefined set of options. Let's say we'll define a new field size which will take a value between small, medium and large. The way we need to validate this requirement is I will define the fields as str. I will make it as required. And then I need to add validate dot one-off. The one-off will take an array of strings. What I'm going to do is I will define an array project size with options small, medium and large. We will pass this to the one-off method. By defining like this, the Marshmallow will validate this field size, which should take a value between these 3 strings only. If something else is being passed, it will throw an error. We will now check that. Say I will add a new attribute size and I will mention it as small. I will now test it. Okay, my server has stopped. Project size is equal to the array. I will restart the server. Okay. Now I will test the API again. Now you can see the validation has passed through successfully and have received the request body back. What I will do now is I will just change this attribute value and test it again. Now you can see the error shown as must be one-off small, medium and large. And this is how one-off validation should be implemented. The next type of validation we are going to see is integer range validation. For that we will define an integer field. I will name it as memory and I will mark it as field integer with default things like a required is equal to true. And to implement the range validation, we'll pass the validation validate dot range. Range is like a minimum equal to 0 and maximum is equal to 200. We will test this by passing memory. I will pass it as 101 for example. Okay, I was mentioned max as 200, so say I will pass it as 201. And you can see the Marshmallow has thrown an error saying that memory value must be greater than or equal to 0 and less than or equal to 200. This is how we implement an integer range validation. I will revert back the value to a valid value, say 150, and call the API again, and the API has been passed successfully. The next type of validation we will see now is field level custom validation. As you can see, the validate.length, validate.oneoff or validate.range, these are all a built-in validation provided by Marshmallow. In case if we wanted to implement our own custom validation, still we can extend the schema and do that. I will now demonstrate how to do our custom implementation. Say I will define a new variable number of users which is going to be an integer field. I will mark it as required here. Now we will implement the custom validation for this field. The way to do that custom validation is to use the decorator validates. But before we use this, we need to import from Marshmallow. I've imported the validates decorator from Marshmallow. For the validate decorator, we have to pass what is the name of the field we are going to implement this validation for, and then define validate, the name of the field. The parameters are self and value. Value is the value of which is being passed through the input. I will check if the value is less than 10 or value is greater than 20. I will raise a validation error with some message. Number of users should be between 10 and 20. Before I use this error message, I need to import it from the Marshmallow. Yeah, now I have imported it. Now we will test it by adding the number of users in the request body. Number of users, I'm going to set it as 25, for example. And now I'm going to call this API. The Marshmallow has responded with the custom error we have mentioned. Number of users should be between 10 and 20. I make it to 15. Here the validation have passed successfully. The next type of validation we are going to see is schema level custom validation. Until now, all the validation we have seen is field level, where all the validation will be applied against their specific field only. The schema level validation can be used to validate the attributes within the schema, like any dependent variables. For example, say if the size is small, we wanted to validate that the memory should be between 0 to 100. And if the size is medium, the memory should be between 100 to 200. Similarly, if size is large, the memory should be between 200 to 300. If we wanted to implement this kind of inter-field validation, we have to use the schema level custom validation. The way to implement is we need to import the validates schema. Validates schema. Validate schema is a decorator. I'm going to define validate size and memory. The parameter is data and keyword args. Here in this data, the entire input string is passed, whereas here in the validate, only the actual value of this particular field is being passed. So we will implement the validation here. Say if data of size is equal to small, we need to validate the memory should be between 0 and 100. For that, we will implement and data of memory is less than 0 or data of memory is greater than 100. If it satisfies this condition, I will raise validation error with the message for small memory should be between 0 and 100. We will test this by, say I will pass small and I'm passing the memory as 150. Yeah, but before that we need to remove the validation we have already implemented here. So I need to remove this validation. so that this schema level validation takes place. I will pass this now, and you can see for small, memory should be between 0 and 100. As you can see here, the attribute name is mentioned as underscore schema because it is not being linked to any specific attribute, which we can still do it by creating an errors dictionary and then assigning the value to errors memory is equal to for this small memory should be between 0 and 100. Now we will raise the validation error passing this errors. I will save it and now I will hit it again. As you can see here, the attribute name is mentioned appropriately and the message has been shown here. We can keep extending this validation for the medium and large as I explained before. With these, I have covered the basic validations that can be done with Marshmallow. Hope this is helpful and thanks for watching.